Secrets from the Grave. The disappearance of 12-year-old Moira Anderson baffled detectives for decades. Now new claims suggest she may have been murdered by a Kirk elder friend of 𝗲𝗿𝗱𝗶𝗁𝗱. By Janice Burns, February 7, 2000. Daily Record Scotland. A Scottish paedophile and friend of notorious pervert killer Fred West has been linked to one of Scotland's most mysterious murders. Perverted church elder Jimmy Gallogley died in prison while serving a 10-year sentence for molesting 5 young girls. But his close relatives claim he has taken the secret of the murder of schoolgirl Moira Anderson, more than 40 years ago, to his grave. The 12-year-old girl disappeared near her home in Coatbridge on February 23, 1957. Her body has never been found and, despite the case being reopened several years ago, police have still failed to find her killer. But the Daily Record can reveal that the finger of guilt is now being pointed firmly at Gallogley by his own family. They have spoken out for the first time about the suspicions which have ripped their lives apart since Moira went missing 43 years ago. Gallogley, a former friend and neighbour of notorious mass murderer Fred West, worked with the Baxter's coach firm in Coatbridge. His colleague, convicted child molester 𝗲𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍, now aged 79, has always been suspected because Moira was known to have boarded his bus on the day she vanished. Relatives of the dead man say Gallogley and 𝗧𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍 were involved in a paedophile ring the late 1950s and early 1960s along with neighbour Fred West. Ice cream vendor West married local girl Catherine Coslow in 1962. They lived in Coatbridge and Glasgow together before moving to England, where she became one of his 12 victims. Gallogley lived just yards from West's home in the same road, Hospital Street. As the years have passed, the murder of Moira has confounded everyone, but relatives of both Moira and Gallogley believe that Gallogley and 𝗧𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍 acted together to kill and dispose of the little girl's body. They claim both men were the last people to see Moira alive. Gallogley's relatives, who do not wish to be named for fear of reprisals, broke their silence because they have been consumed by guilt feelings for decades. One relative said, "We have always believed in our hearts that Jimmy had something to do with that wee girl's murder. After he was jailed for sexually abusing 5 girls, we became even more convinced." To this day, Moira Anderson's murder still haunts Coatbridge. Anger and frustration is still evident in the community because her murder remains unsolved, and even the mention of her name sends a chill through the close-knit community. Moira's family, old classmates, and those involved in the search for her killer will share in their grief once again at a memorial service in Coatbridge's Dunbith Park on Wednesday. It is almost exactly 43 years since little Moira pulled her woolen pixie hat over her ears to brave the blizzards and gale force winds that tore through Coatbridge on the last day she was seen alive. As the snowstorm blasted her from all sides, she fell in the snow, but still managed to hold on tight to the change her gran had given her to buy butter at the local co-op. But the shop was closed by the time she got there and, her face and hands frozen stiff by the icy winds, Moira would have been dreading the painful walk home. As she set off, Moira spotted a local Clifton Hill bus heading towards her, and knew that it was her refuge. The bus drew to a halt, and the familiar smiling face of driver 𝗲𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍 welcomed her aboard. A woman watching from her living room window saw the bus move off, and that was the last time Moira was seen. 𝗧𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍 has always been the prime suspect, and even his own daughter, Sandra Brown, who now lives in Edinburgh, is convinced he killed Moira. Sandra wrote a best-selling book, Where There Is Evil, which reveals her heartbreak as an 8-year-old child, and the events that led her to believe her father was guilty. But last night Sandra revealed, for the first time, that she believes her father had an accomplice, and is convinced Gallogley played a part in disposing of Moira's body. Sandra explained, "I do not think my father acted alone that night. I am sure now that someone helped him. I believe it could have been Gallogley, because they were as thick as thieves." Moira's sister, Janet Hart, who has travelled from Australia to attend the memorial service, wrote to Gallogley 3 times begging him to admit his guilt. She sent the letters to the convicted paedophile at Peter Head Prison before he died of cancer in April last year. Janet thought there was a glimmer of hope that Gallogley would break down and reveal what happened to her sister. But he didn't. Janet said, Gallogley knew more than he was letting on. Both he and 𝗧𝗿𝗄𝗃 were in cahoots. They were very good friends, and I am convinced he was involved. She heavily criticized the police for failing to convict the pair of Moira's murder and said, "The police let us down badly. I don't know what they were thinking letting these animals off with it. Moira will always be in our hearts, and we will never rest until her body is found." When the case was reopened 7 years ago, with fresh evidence from Sandra Brown, the Scottish legal authorities decided there was not enough evidence to charge their prime suspect, and the plan to use divers to search Witchwood Pond, a lake in Coatbridge, for Moira's body was ditched. No one ever suspected Gallogley of being involved until he was sentenced to 10 years for attempting to rape and molest 5 young girls in 1997. Until then, his true identity was masked by his dedication to the church and his wife of 40 years, Jeannie. Her father was the session clerk at Townhead Parish Church in Coatbridge, and her brother was a minister. Gallogley became a well-respected church elder at Calder Parish Church, and parents put all their trust in him to look after their young children at Sunday school and during day trips. At the age of 66, he thought he was beyond reproach, and that his dark secret would never be revealed. But the truth about his double life was eventually exposed when he was caught on a CCTV camera interfering with a little girl in a block of flats in the 𝗬𝗆 area of the town. He confessed to a string of sickening assaults on girls, including to sets of sisters aged between 7 and 13 over a number of years. The High Court in Glasgow heard that one girl was abused in her bedroom, and Gallogley held a Bible and preached that what he was about to do was what God wanted. He told her, "It is God's way," and then ordered the child not to leave until she did what he asked. Gallogley brought untold shame on his family. With such an unusual surname, they were shunned by the entire community. His brother, John, now lives in Criston, outside Glasgow, and said his family had suffered enough without linking his dead pervert brother to Moira's death. He said, "Let him rest in peace. We don't want all this dragged up again. We have gone through enough. My sons cannot get jobs because of their surname, and he has brought this family down to the lowest. We want to leave him dead and buried." John claims his brother had an alibi for his whereabouts on the night of Moira's disappearance. He insisted that he had spent the entire night with this wife to be organizing their wedding at her home in Townhead. Coincidentally, that was where Moira was last seen. Jeannie fled the family home in disgust when Gallogley was arrested and went into hiding, but we tracked her down at a secret address to find out the truth. She said, "Every day I live with the horror of what he did to those girls. I was totally oblivious to it. He conned me for 40 years. He kept me in the dark about who his friends were and what he was up to. He lived a double life, and I can honestly say that he never told me he was ever questioned by the police over Moira's disappearance. The police never asked me to confirm his alibi, and I cannot remember whether he was with me that night or not. I suppose anything is possible when you are dealing with such a devious man. He could have been involved. I hope to God not, but I have no idea. I'm just glad he's dead." Workers at Baxter's buses were stunned when Gallogley befriended outcast 𝗧𝗿𝗄𝗃 after he started working for the firm back in 1956. Former worker 𝗖𝗆𝗱𝗶𝗁𝗍𝗍 said, "Everyone knew 𝗧𝗿𝗃 was a pervert who preyed on young girls. No one wanted to be associated with him, but Gallogley became his best pal. They obviously had a lot more in common than we thought, and I have always suspected that the two of them met up on the night of Moira's disappearance. 𝗧𝗿𝗄𝗃 did not have the intelligence to act alone and be able to hide a body, so that it was never found. 𝗧𝗿𝗄𝗃 has always maintained his innocence, blaming Moira's murder initially on a fellow worker at Baxter's and later on the girl's, now deceased Uncle Jim. The pensioner, who moved to Leeds in 1965 and still lives there with his third wife Sylvia, 70, denied being friends with Gallogley. Garcher admitted knowing that Fred West lived in the Hospital Road area, and denied suggestions of an organized gang of child molesters in the area. His denials will provide no comfort for the relatives and friends who will honor the memory of Moira when they gather to express their grief later this week, continuing to hope and pray that, one day, the painful mystery will be solved.